What do you picture when you think of a woman in the Old West? Maybe you imagine a damsel in distress, tied to the train tracks, or a barmaid sliding a drink across the saloon to a rugged cowboy. Thanks to movies and TV, those images have stuck. But in reality, the women of the Wild West were just as tough, and sometimes even tougher, than the men. They weren't just love interests or background characters. They were sharpshooters, business owners, ranchers, and held their own in an ever-expanding frontier, and their stories should be told. Some even contributed to significant movements expanding rights for women. If you love uncovering the real stories behind the myths, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a new frontier tale. Today, we're shining a light on the fearless women who helped shape the West through grit, determination, and groundbreaking achievements. The Old West wasn't just a man's world, it was their world too. Women as sharpshooters. In the Old West, nothing was stopping a woman from owning a gun. One woman was Annie Oakley, who learned to shoot at a young age to feed her family. At just 15, she competed against Frankie Butler, an experienced shooter, in a shooting contest and won. She later went on to be a showwoman for Buffalo Bill. It's said that she taught over 15,000 women how to shoot, believing that handling a gun should feel as natural to a woman as cradling a baby. Fortunately, Annie lived long enough to witness the invention of motion pictures, and thanks to that, we actually have rare footage of her legendary shooting skills. Take a look. But it wasn't just Annie Oakley, who was a well-known shooter. Another one was Lillian Smith. The two were like yin and yang and fierce rivals in their times. Does this seem like the Old West you'd see in the movies? Think of a Wild West showdown, but instead of two men, it's two women. Okay, they didn't shoot at each other, but with how fierce their rivalry was, this was a possibility. Another shooter who was part of Wild Bill later in life was Calamity Jane. Born Martha Jane Canary, she was a woman of many sides. Her shooting was top-notch, and she performed many daredevil stunts. But she also helped the sick and the needy whenever she could. That's one theme you'll notice in this video. Women using incredible skills to show not only power, but compassion. But while people like Annie Oakley have received recognition in some media, they're not as well known as their male counterparts. Some were even regarded as men, not acknowledging their feminine prowess. However, despite the discrepancies, many women could easily outshoot a man, even today. Some women, however, fought with words rather than guns to make meaningful changes. Newspaper editors. Women also played a role in the press. While they mostly published current stories, some worked hard to fight for equal rights in a male-dominated world. One of the most notable is Carolyn Churchill, who was a newspaper editor for the Queen Bee, a feminist publication in Colorado during the suffrage movement. Churchill traveled around, writing and editing articles to push for female independence in the post-Civil War era. Her work eventually led to women's right to vote in the state of Colorado. Churchill also exposed the conditions and lives of many ethnic groups in the rest of the world, pushing not only for female rights, but also for fairer treatment of immigrants and minorities, specifically the Ute tribe. She believed that all people had an equal chance to live a life free from repression and bodily harm. To this day, Churchill is still seen as a pioneer of the women's suffrage movement, especially in the West. Entrepreneurs of the Old West. But it's not just shooting that women were good at in the Old West. While guns were one way that you could be powerful, being an entrepreneur was another. Now, when you think of Old West entrepreneurs who made millions, you may imagine an oil baron with a monocle and a top hat. But what if we were to tell you that not only were there women who made millions, but black women? That's right. Meet Mary Ellen Pleasant. Not much is known about her upbringing, but she managed to climb to the top of the corporate and political ladder, working to expand the Underground Railroad. She used her circumstances as a black woman to appear lowly to other rich folk, but she used that to her advantage, getting to know them and making deals. These people would call upon her services, and over time, she would amass great wealth. Much of her money went toward helping the less fortunate and was spent fighting for civil rights. In fact, she was considered the mother of human rights in California. Now, is this someone you heard about when you learned about civil rights? Or are you just hearing about her for the first time? Another female entrepreneur was Luzenac Stanley Wilson. Wilson and her family were part of the California Gold Rush, but little did she know that she was already worth her weight in gold. The discovery came when the family was descending into Sacramento. As she was cooking a meal for her family, a man approached her and then offered $5 for one of her biscuits, then 10. In these times, $10 was nearly $400 in today's money. Think about paying the price for a brand new TV or video game console to eat a fluffy buttermilk biscuit. It must have been the tastiest biscuit in the world. Well, for this male-dominated settler, food made by a woman was worth that much. Was it because her cooking was that good? Because they expected women to cook the food? Or because all of the men in Sacramento could not cook? We're not sure, but she found her fortune there as a woman in this town. In fact, she would only see 2 other women in Sacramento during her stay there. Her family ended up selling their option to purchase an interest in a hotel, and there she cooked for many men who paid a lot of money for food made by a woman. Wilson's story showed that even living a traditionalist lifestyle at this time could earn you a fortune when you played your cards right. Stagecoach Mary. As the country expanded, mail carriers were more important than ever. One woman during this time was Mary Fields, or Stagecoach Mary. She was the first black postwoman to work in a star route. Now, being a postwoman doesn't sound like an exciting job, but during these times you never know who you'll run into. Not only could you run into thieves, but wolves could make the difference between a successful delivery and an early grave. But with her .38 Smith & Wesson, she defended her route with all her honor. In one story, she spent an entire night fighting off wolves who knocked down her stagecoach. It's almost like something from an action movie, but it's real. She was also a well-known smoker and drinker and even got into bar fights. Again, this feels like a story reserved for a gritty cowboy in a movie, not what we think of as a black woman during these times. Despite her toughness, she also had a good heart, loved children, and even offered babysitting services. Some looked at Mary's history and wouldn't let her anywhere near their kids, but others thought she was the perfect person to raise their kids while they were gone. Women as activists. Eliza Farnham was a woman who was a strong activist in her time. In 1844, she became the matron of the women's ward at Sing Sing Prison in New York. Here she called for new ways to rehabilitate the female prison. This included music and acts of kindness rather than cruelty. She also advocated for treating prisoners using phrenology. Phrenology used the bumps on skulls to predict traits, and while this is considered pseudoscience nowadays, it was a sign that Farnham was thinking outside the box with how to treat her fellow women. Her beliefs eventually caused her to resign from her time at Sing Sing, but her activism wasn't over yet. In the late 1850s, she worked aimlessly to help women find homes who needed it the most. While her life was cut short at 49 due to tuberculosis, she planted the seeds for many reforms in the future. Women as cattle ranchers. Cattle ranching was considered a man's job, but some women took it upon themselves to work in the cattle business. One prominent example is Mary Ann, also known as Molly Goodnight, the wife of rancher Charles Goodnight. Though her primary duties were homemaking, being a doctor and nurse, and being a spiritual comforter, Mary Ann helped run the Goodnight Dyer Cattle Company in Colorado. She established the Goodnight Buffalo Herd, which became known throughout the world. Her ranch was her pride and joy, and she even got photos commissioned by J.C. Cowles to paint scenes around the ranch. Another cattle queen is Elizabeth Lizzie Johnson Williams. This woman completely defied convention by amassing a small fortune through estate deals during her herd of longhorns to the railheads in Kansas. Though her first vocation was as a school teacher, she eventually saw the profit made in the beef trade, investing in cattle. Smart move. Lizzie soon became the first woman to go up the Chisholm Trail with her brand. Lizzie definitely controlled the family business, stealing her husband's cattle and branding them as hers because she knew her husband would lose them anyway. Though they did have business tensions, the two were devoted to one another. When she died in 1924, Lizzie's cash and property holdings amounted to $3 million in today's buying power. which was unheard of in that day and age, especially for a woman. Ahead of her time, she was a real pioneer in not only the cattle business, but also real estate and finance, dominating many of her male peers. Pony Express riders. Some women were Pony Express riders, but they were off the record. Many of these women still played a role, feeding the men at the stations and wrangling many of the superintendents and smiths. One woman even baked 100 pounds of flour a day, selling each for 50 cents a loaf. She made $30 a day off that. Most of the notable women who did this were not directly mentioned. However, there was one, Louisa Freeman. This woman worked hard to help many of the Pony Express riders rush on by with her family. Another is Tom Perry, who worked at Kennecook Station, cooking enough to praise many, including Mark Twain, who mentioned she made fantastic coffee. Some of these women were also great at other businesses. In Wyoming, Molly Slade lived at Horseshoe Station, where her husband was the keeper. She operated and helped with many duties associated with the Pony Express, acting as a sort of manager to the riders. Though the duties were mostly at the station, there is speculation that some of the women did ride, though under male pseudonyms. They had to use male names but worked in similar areas and jobs as their male counterparts. We don't have a specific number on how many women worked as riders. What do you think? Law enforcement. Some women also worked in law enforcement. One of the most notable was F.M. Miller, a deputy U.S. Marshal. While little is known outside of her life as deputy marshal, her career was worth noting. Miller walked around the southern Indian Territory, which included Paris, Texas. Carrying a pistol around her and a Winchester on her saddle, she was known as an incredible shot and horsewoman, brave to a fault. Some equated her to Belle Starr, though she operated on the other side of the law. Miller would walk around with her cowboy hat and a pistol ready with cartridges. Her Colt pistol was a favorite that she knew how to use. The area she worked in was known as an outlaw country, with many dangerous villains guilty of heinous crimes. They flocked to this Indian Territory because, technically, law enforcement did not have jurisdiction. But what they didn't know was that FM worked as a deputy marshal, commanded under the appointment of Judge Isaac Parker. She, along with 200 other deputy marshals, would eventually clean up outlaw heaven. Miller, at the time, was the only woman to be appointed as deputy marshal in Indian Territory. Again, easier said than done. During this time, 100 deputies lost their lives between the years of 1872 and 1896 because of these criminals. It was a rough world, and back then, being a deputy was a life-or-death job. However, this did not stop the deputy, but only inspired her to free the territory of these nefarious criminals. FM's arrest count was some of the highest in the area. Her legacy lives on in the show Lady Lawman, which follows a woman with the same name to track down an outlaw. Her birth and death are not known, but from the information gathered, we know she's a woman who will not let any criminal go free. Women as doctors. Finally, let's talk about a woman who helped the town she lived in stay as healthy as possible. The frontier could be dangerous, and when an injury, sickness, or infection happened, there needed to be a doctor in the house. Dr. Susan Anderson, or Doc Susie, was one such woman. Susan, encouraged by her father to work in medicine, moved to Colorado but found it hard to work in Denver. In 1907, she contracted tuberculosis, a disease that was fatal at the time. However, she managed to overcome it and moved to Fraser. Here, she became the only physician treating people of all ailments, including pneumonia, during the 1918 flu pandemic. Of course, living in Colorado, she treated many skiing injuries too. But this is not the only reason her story is incredible. She made house calls and was not the owner of a horse or car. Often, she had to walk through the snow to treat a patient, and many times her patients paid her with firewood or food. Imagine telling your doctor that you'd buy some pizza for him to treat you. It wouldn't go over well in today's world, where going to a doctor can feel like paying a fortune. But for Susan, that was enough. Despite her struggles, she lived a long life of 90 years and was the inspiration for many stories, possibly including Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. While women did face oppression at this time, not all of them lived lives as housewives or damsels in distress. Some made millions, while others thought outside of the law. The women in this video brought a new meaning to the word trailblazer. Many incredible women lived bold, fearless lives in the Old West, coming from all walks of life and backgrounds. Yet for decades, their stories were buried. Forgotten, because history, like so many things back then, was a man's world. Thankfully today their voices are finally being heard again, and hopefully with growing interest, even more unsung heroes of the West will step out of the shadows of history and into the spotlight where they belong. If you found these trailblazing women of the Old West as fascinating as we did, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment telling us which story inspired you most. And if you want to keep exploring the real, raw, and remarkable side of history, don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're the first to know when we post our next deep dive. Until next time, partner, keep chasing those untold stories.